We continue our special four-part podcast series on presidents of the Republic of Texas in this episode. Today, we look at the presidency of Mirabeau B. Lamar, the third president of the Republic of Texas. I know you'll enjoy this episode. I'm back with Don Frazier, and we're continuing our exploration of presidents of the Republic of Texas. Today, we're up to the second fully elected president, third total, Mirabeau B. Lamar. I have been a fan of Mirabeau B. Lamar since the 7th grade when I went to Lamar Junior High School in Bryan, Texas.
And I went to Lamar High School in Arlington, Texas.
There we go. And then there's Lamar High School in Houston, Texas. So a name known in the state of Texas, but I don't think as many people really know about him. He came to Texas to visit in 1835 and returned in 1836 to fight. And in doing a little research for this podcast, I discovered that he was the only person I've ever heard of to have a battlefield promotion from private to colonel.
Yeah.
Based upon bravery in one little action in the Battle of San Jacinto. You want to pick it up there, Don?
He scooped up the war and saved his hide. I think when he saved T.J. Rusk from being skewered by a Mexican lance, that probably got him a debt of gratitude that somebody wanted to pay up, make good on. So yeah, he's an interesting dude because he fancies himself poet, warrior, and Georgian, and he writes poetry. He also is fearless in battle. He's a pretty reckless dude on that day, on the 20th of April, when they're in that cavalry scrap with the Mexican cavalry, which was really the strong arm of the Mexican army. You have to give him props for being tough, but also with a tender heart. An interesting guy.
I was going to say much like you.
Yes, much like me. A very ardent warrior. That's me.
After the Battle of San Jacinto, he moved a little bit more into the civilian realm, but he was appointed Secretary of War by then Provisional President Burnett.
That's correct. So you're looking for somebody that has earned his spurs, to use a phrase, and Lamar had done it. Now, one of the things that I would say may be a failing with Lamar is sometimes he thinks he's smarter than he is. And so he figures himself to be a polymath, and he has a very eclectic and broad range of interest. So Secretary of War, you bet I can do that. Write poetry? Absolutely. Form the Philosophical Society of Texas for the dissemination of knowledge and scientific inquiry? Absolutely. So he's an egghead with a keen sword, and it makes sense. One of the issues, too, that the Republic of Texas has is it's an accidental republic. And so when they start looking for talent, they pretty much say, you'll do, because these are all placeholders in their head. Nobody's playing the long game for the Republic of Texas. So it makes sense that you put Lamar in as Secretary of War.
And one of the things that I really was surprised to learn was, and we touched on a prior episode, was not simply the personality-driven component of Texas politics at that time, but the actual hate that men had for each other and how that would manifest itself. And the first time we see it here is outgoing President Sam Houston, incoming President Lamar were opposite sides of the political spectrum, to the extent there was a spectrum back then.
Maybe they were on the spectrum, as they say. The thing that is interesting about all those guys in that early time in the Republic of Texas, at the same time that they are denigrating each other, they're also getting together and having broad philosophical conversations over brown liquor. And so it's an interesting time, but these guys are also driven by the concept of honor. And so they're having to maintain public face, and so if somebody says something that's a tweak of the nose of the other, then they have to respond in kind. Very rarely does it come to blows. There's a lot of times where people accuse Sam Houston of things, and somebody said, well, my gosh, your honor has been slighted. And his remark to that was, I never fight downhill, so it doesn't matter. And so yes, these guys could absolutely be at daggers drawn, but you can't think of two more diametrically opposed personalities than Houston and Lamar. And their attitude towards their administration is different. They go into the chore with a different sort of tack, And essentially, Lamar undoes everything that Sam Houston did. The Republic of Texas is very schizophrenic.
We went from a capital in Houston or Harrisburg, moved to the capital to the city of Austin. So Austin today has Mirabeau B. Lamar to thank. I'm the son of a professor, so I'm a professor's kid, and I have that role to also thank for Mirabeau B. Lamar. I was wondering if you talk a little bit about his role in creating a primary and secondary educational system in Texas.
You bet. He is credited with being the father of education in Texas, or the progenitor, whatever. But let me roll it back to that capital in the small village of Waterloo, which becomes Austin. Lamar is implementing policies that are really designed for a standalone Texas. A Texas that stands on its own 2 feet, not one that's pining for annexation. He is positioning it to face a future on its own should the United States never come around. So, how do you build a nation from whole cloth? You got to educate its population. And that's where he says, all right, we're long on land, we're short on schools, so let's set aside a certain amount of acreage for every survey that will then go and support some sort of public education fund. So that's what he does. Now, he leaves the implementation of that to the local communities and the counties. And sometimes they jump all over it and they take a very studied approach to it. Sometimes they completely ignore it. One of the things that strikes me about education in Texas, doesn't matter what the guys in the Capitol are saying about it, when it gets to the local level, that's where the implementation kicks in. And a lot of times people in Texas during that time period figured that education was a personal matter, a family matter. And while the state is appropriating a mechanism for funding the public education, it doesn't really kick in for a while because that property's not valuable until it gets sold. And it's not going to get sold until you get some sort of stable government. And you're not going to get some sort of stable government until you quit being schizophrenic. And you're not going to quit being schizophrenic until you get all the politics in the state sorted out. It's pretty remarkable. So yes, he gets credit for at least saying education's a big deal. And I mentioned the Philosophical Society of Texas earlier. That's about the general spreading of smartness across the state. So he is thinking in those realms, but his ability to take that vision and see it implemented at a practical level, that's probably half a century or more down the road. Now, speaking of a republic that stands on its own, that's why Austin is where Austin is. All right, if you draw a line from Fort Smith, Arkansas, all the way down to Monterey, Mexico, and then you draw another line from, say, Indianola or Galveston, if you'd rather, Texas coast, all the way to Santa Fe, those two lines intersect nearly on top of Austin. So why would you move the capital from Houston, which is smack dab in the middle of the population of this republic, out to the frontier where it's inconvenient and fairly remote? He's playing the long game. He says, this is going to be the crossroads of empire. This is where we'll put our capital.
And he also started the Texas State Library. Was that also consistent with him playing a longer game?
Oh, absolutely. And the Texas General Land Office is enhanced during all this time period. Yeah, Texas starts to build institutions that are really national institutions during this Republic period, and it's really Lamar doing it. Sam Houston was just going to do lip service and play the politics towards annexation. Lamar's going, we're not sure annexation's ever going to happen, and then it may not happen on terms that are favorable to us, so we need to go ahead and make plans for being our own place. So state library makes sense. And you have to have archives. Archives talk about what the business of the government's actually been. You got to have records of that. So the archives and where it's located becomes a very salient feature of the disagreement between Houston fans and Lamar fans, because where the archives exist, that's really the seat of government. We get wrapped up thinking that the seat of government is some fancy edifice, Republic of Texas was conducting business out of frame houses, log cabins, board and batten. These were not impressive structures. Didn't matter. It was the strong box full of the papers that really mattered.
So there's a couple of parts of the Lamar administration I still think raise, if not eyebrows, questions today.
Sure.
And that was, one, his Indian removal policy,
Yep.
and two, his putative expedition to Santa Fe.
Yes. All right. So let's unpack the Indians first. So the indigenous peoples of Texas are a very mixed bunch. So we have to roll back and talk about who they are. In East Texas, you have very few that are indigenous to East Texas other than the Caddos. Caddos have been there since contact. Now, there are some Attakapaw and some Karankawa down on the coast and down in the Big Thicket. But you also had a large number of immigrant Indians. These include the Chickamauga Cherokees. You had some Shawnee. You had some Delaware. So these are all tribes that really we associate with homelands much, much further east. Say the Susquehanna Valley in some cases, or the of North Carolina. So what are they doing in Texas? Trying to get away from the Americans. And so the Spanish policy was, hey, if you'll come in and agree to become Spanish, we'll let you in. These guys all said, sounds like a great idea to us. So during the Spanish period, a bunch of these tribes moved in, essentially refugeeing out of situations in the east. So this includes even the Alabama Coushatta Indians that still live in East Texas down in the Big Thicket. They're a branch of the Creek Nations. East Texas has a number of tribes that are relative newcomers. Then they also have some tribes that are not so relative newcomers. The Wichitas came in sometime between when the indigenous people and the original people in Texas were here and later comers like we just discussed. But they are actually immigrants from the Kansas region. The Apaches, they showed up actually just before contact. They're in Texas as well, but they're always looking over their shoulder because of the latest newcomers, which are the Comanches. And the Comanches have been kicking around since about 1780. And so, you know, it is a fluid situation. Who are these people and who are the first Texans? The first Texans are only, all the other tribes in Texas came from someplace else. And people oftentimes don't realize how dynamic and how mobile these different nations actually were, especially after contact and the introduction of things like the horse and the diseases that kind of ravaged their societies and reorganized them, etc. So you're now in a position as the president of the Republic of Texas to deal with who are legitimately here. And the Indians seem like a potential weak spot in a future Texas, primarily because you couldn't really quite count on who they would be loyal to. East Texas Indians, let's take a look at them first. There was some implication that those guys had been in touch with Mexican agents. So there's always a potential for a fifth column. Now, was that something that was actually afoot? Indications are, yeah, there actually was some communications between the East Texas Indians and Mexico. So that's going to have to be dealt with. And the easiest way to do it is y'all got to get out of town. And the ultimatum sent, the Indians say, look, you know, we got a corn harvest coming up. Just give us a little time to harvest our corn, then we'll be on our way. Because after all, there's Cherokees in Arkansas, there's Cherokees in eastern, what is now Oklahoma, Indian Territory, Shawnee, same, Delaware, same. The Republic of Texas didn't wait for corn harvest. They thought that might have been a delaying tactic, and so they helped usher them out of Texas violently. And the Battle of the Neches is the culminating point of that. And the head of the Cherokees in East Texas was killed, Chief Bowl. Those folks are scattered. A bunch of them take refuge in the Cross Timbers. There is a Texas militia general named Edward H. Tarrant, for whom Tarrant County is named. He leads an expedition into the Cross Timbers, present-day Dallas-Fort Worth area, and hits a number of camps. I think there's about 5 different villages up and down Village Creek where present-day Arlington and Fort Worth meet, and drove essentially a coalition of Cherokees, Caddos, Wichitas out of that region. And pretty much any claim that those different groups would have on North Texas or East Texas. Comanches are a little tougher. Those guys, essentially, under the Houston administration, they said, all right, we might have found somebody we could deal with here, but they were a little slow coming to the table. And what happens is Houston's gone, now facing a Lamar administration. The Comanches are not necessarily dealing in full faith. The Texans are not dealing necessarily in full faith. Everybody's suspicious of each other. There's an incident known as the Council House fight that occurs that breaks at any chance of a reconciliation between Texas and the Comanches, which is then followed by what's known as the Linville Raid. And Linville Raid is the deep penetration of a very large Comanche force all the way to the Texas coast, and then the fight at Plum Creek. So what happens during the Lamar administration, East Texas Indians are driven out with the exception of the Alabama Coushatta, because they were down in the deep thicket, or the big thicket in East Texas, and they weren't bothering anybody. But all those other immigrant Indians are driven out. Comanches are now implacable foes. And so you have a full-blown Indian war that's going to go on, and the Comanches are bringing in allies. They bring in the Kiowas, who say, okay, if y'all don't like them, then I don't guess we do either. So the Lamar administration starts hemorrhaging money because they have to do things like reconstitute an army. They've also reconstituted a navy. And the thing about navies is that they're driven by boats. And boats are busy rotting whether you're using them or not. And so the Texas Navy starts patrolling the Gulf of Mexico. Most of these ships are bought on credit, and the Republic of Texas can't even pay the boat bill. And so they end up leasing the boats to the breakaway Republic of the Yucatan. And now you have Texas boats flying on behalf or sailing on behalf of the Yucatecans against the Mexicans. So is this a Mexican-Texas war, or is this a Mexican breakaway Yucatan Republic? Yeah, it's a three-cornered contest there. So we started out talking about Indians, but Indians leads to military affairs leads to hemorrhaging money. What else do you need an army for? You've got these places that haven't exactly accepted the overlordship of the Republic of Texas. And most notably, this includes a place called Laredo and another place called Santa Fe. So Laredo, we'll get to that. Laredo's very close to Mexico, and that's a border issue, so we're going to delay that one. But Santa Fe is important because Santa Fe represents a financial choke point on the Santa Fe Trail. Lamar says if in fact we are going to be our own inland empire, we have to put a toll booth on the Santa Fe Trail that controls all that traffic between Independence, Missouri, and essentially Chihuahua, Mexico. And what kind of stuff is going up and down the Santa Fe Trail? It's everything from livestock. The Comanches use it. Comanches use it to fence horses that they've stolen up at Bent's Fort. It's an incredibly important artery of commerce on the Great Plains. And so the Republic of Texas should have a chunk of that action. And so the Lamar administration actually makes not one Santa Fe expedition, but actually there's two more. The Snively expedition and the Warfield expedition. All of these expeditions are designed to move up into the southern Great Plains and establish Texan control of the Santa Fe Trail from essentially the Arkansas River all the way down Delta. And each one of them fails. Now, the Snively expedition gets stopped by American dragoons who round them up, disarm them, spank them, send them home. Warfield expedition, they go and hold a New Mexico town for ransom, a place called Mora, New Mexico, where they're still not happy about seeing Texas plates. But the Warfield expedition was composed of a bunch of mountain men, and after they looted the town, everybody went back to Colorado and Wyoming, trapping. The Santa Fe expedition, though, was an organized attempt to establish a trade relationship between Texas and Santa Fe, but this trade relationship was not just about freight wagons, it was also about troops that were going to enforce this trade relationship and actually organize a county government in Santa Fe, which the Republic of Texas tries on numerous occasions. They try to organize 4 counties out of what becomes New Mexico and only 2 of them stick: Presidio County and El Paso County. Worth County, which is present-day Albuquerque, and Santa Fe County don't stick. All right, that's a little ahead of the story. Lamar's administration puts together a trade expedition with military escort, but they don't have a good. And so what they figured they would do, the best map they had was the Pike map. Pike said the source of the Red River is actually in the foothills of the Rockies just east of Santa Fe. So if you take a look at a Texas map, you go north, hit the Red River, hook a left. It should be easy. Problem is, the source of the Red River is not where they thought it was. In fact, it plays out at the Cap Rock. So you find this military/trade expedition at the foot of the Cap Rock with no way forward. The Kiowas are showing up, picking off their horses. The Comanches are showing up, picking off their horses. These guys have to burn all their wagons. So all the wagons are actually burned at a place called Linguist Creek, present-day Kittiquay, Texas. Guys have gone out there and found where the wagons were burnt and all the trade goods in there. It's pretty interesting. But the survivors essentially go up on top of the Cap Rock, make their way across the Llano Estacado. When they finally get to Santa Fe, or to New Mexico territory, they run into New Mexico militia, and the Texans are willing to surrender on the spot if they can just get a drink of water. So it's an absolute total disaster.
So what did this expedition do for the finances of the Republic of Texas?
Oh, it just punched another hole in the big money bucket. This thing is leaking like a sieve. And you can see that during the Lamar administration, the national debt goes up 7-fold. This guy has 3 years, and he manages to outspend anybody's imagination. Boats are expensive, troops are expensive, trade goods are expensive, everything is expensive, and Lamar doesn't hesitate to buy it. And there's absolutely nothing propping up the Texas economy. They're floating paper, and they're having a hard time getting anybody to buy the paper. People in Natchez are going, no, I don't think so. We don't see anything backing this. New Orleans, no. You go to Nashville, a little further removed, you can do a little sunshine dance and maybe get some funding. New Yorkers are starting to buy into it because they're playing the long game. Say, look, that's right next to the United States. Sooner or later, it's going to be annexed. So we can tie up our capital for 4 decades, and it's not going to hurt us. So that's what's going on. But, man, he's racking up the debt.
How do you assess President Lamar's Mexico policy or his Mexico relations during his term in office?
He was absolutely determined to Texas sovereignty. So what ends up happening down in Mexico is Mexico starts to have a period of semi-stability. And it's a centralist regime that finally takes over. And these centralists are going, okay, we've been fighting each other for the last 6-7 years. Texas got away from us in the middle of that. Now we have an opportunity to reassert our control. And they actually send 3 different expeditions. The most famous 2 are the Vasquez expedition and the Wall expedition. There's another expedition that actually goes up as far as the Nueces from Matamoros. But these expeditions essentially come in, raise a little hell, and then go on their way. But there is a Texas response, especially to the Wall expedition. There's a little battle outside of San Antonio, Battle of the Salado, which gets a lot of Texans killed. And so we got another monument that goes up in Texas, this one to the dead of the Dawson Massacre that's over in LaGrange. Yeah, I think it's Bastrop. Anyhow, the idea is that there is a border war going on between the Republic of Texas and Mexico that's unresolved. So when Lamar leaves office, that's what Sam Houston inherits. He's got a Navy he doesn't want, an Army he didn't call for, and a war he didn't pick, and now all the Indians are mad. So pick an area that Sam Houston had tried to cut expenses in, and Lamar had just upended it.
We're at the end of our time for this episode, Don, but I hope our listeners will join us for our next episode where we do take up the second term of Sam Houston. Thanks again.
You bet.
This is Tom Fox again. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of a special series on presidents of the Republic of Texas. Please join us again next time where we take up Sam Houston's second term as president. I hope you will subscribe, rate, and review to Leadership Lessons from Presidents, and I hope you will listen to us again. The award-winning Leadership Lessons from Presidents is a special production of the Compliance Podcast Network.